Day 3, just like that, we are in the middle of the week. I hope so far that you've been having a good experience with each other and with this process of becoming more aware of the dynamics of the convention. So to begin, I'll turn you over to our in-house professor, Ezra. Good morning, Ezra.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Yeah. Yes, good morning, everyone. Yesterday was, I think, a transition day. The reason why it was a transition day is because a lot of things became clear. And I think we got to some of that this morning. There's a lot of bits and pieces all over the place, but we still do not have a system, a model for really bringing everything together. For example, in Grenada, we do have a culture of policy, but I'm not sure if everything we spoke about there's any alignment with that policy. So we need to simplify our work, to make it much more rigorous and aligned, and to have coherence. We need to focus some more on bridging that gap. The other thing which is clear based on yesterday's presentations and conversations, we have the data. We do have the data. It sits in a variety of places, but what has happened is that the research methodologies are undefined and it may be not processed properly, not clean, and it's not in a place where the depository where it will be available to all beneficiaries. And if you think about, there's a gentleman that spoke yesterday he spoke about 10 or 12 different initiatives that they have, and I'm pretty sure he's just sitting there. Somebody spoke about a private museum in Grenville. Another one spoke about Westmoreland College storytelling. All of that bits and pieces are just sitting there, and it needs to come together. We talk about folks giving out information, tourists giving tours, and the information is incorrect. So these are things that we have to go back to, and it requires really going into the trenches and rolling up our sleeves and getting the work done, because the conversations are rich, but we have to do the work to bring these pieces together. So what I was thinking is that what I would like you to think about today, what are the barriers? What are the barriers that's preventing us from getting there? And we have to get serious in terms of identifying the institutional barriers that inhibit ICH safeguarding. And the barriers, as you can tell, are persistent, because everyone holding on to their pieces of the action. So we have to make sure that we identify the barriers, and I think that's something that everyone who are participating should be making note of. Things like the insularity that exists, things like the lack of coherence and protocols. I'm seeing a lot of protocols, inadequate collaboration. What are the enabling conditions that lead to these types of insularities? And the knowledge, one of the things I also noticed is that the knowledge that's used are based on mostly intuition and experience. We need to be more data-driven, more system-oriented. Also, a problem-solving approach is still pretty ad hoc, vague and subjective. We need to make it more procedural and objective. Mm-hmm. And in most established profession, you have a practice. Like in medicine, doctors have a practice in terms of the therapies, in terms of the ethical approaches. We need a practice in our work in safeguarding, a safeguarding practice in a work that is transparent and that's common among most of us. The other piece that came across yesterday that we need to really take a handle on is engagement of industry, civil society, and the media in doing this work. And we just can't, come on board. We have to do the work in terms of getting them on board and in a sustainable way. And then I have one key thing that also is important is the context. We operate in a political context, a social context, an economic, a legal context, and a cultural context. So the question is, do we have the productive working relationships with leaders in the Ministry of Education, in the various government ministries and community to safeguard ICH? But these are just some of the things that I was thinking about that we have to really work within. Those are the parameters we have to work within to do this work. Otherwise, as I think Angus said yesterday, and Daryl also said the same thing, and on Friday, we can walk away, we will accomplish nothing if we do not address these specific issues.
Thank you very much for that, Ezra. Well said. I think in the comments that you've made and outlined, I numbered 9 here. In actuality, what you've been doing there, you've actually begun that process of bringing together the components. There's still some answers that are needed, of course, that we will collectively seek to derive during the course of the week, but you have excellently put forward some frames and lenses through which we can continue to work during the course of this week. So thank you for that, Ezra. So we had asked Margaret, I think you had asked Margaret to do a recap for us. So we'll ask Margaret to do that for us now. Good morning, Margaret.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. The way that I put this together, I have to apologize if I kind of echo a couple of things that Ezra just said, but I had my little flow worked out, so I don't know how to fix it as I'm speaking it. But what I have here is notes from our open dialogue, knowledge, and then I also isolated suggestions, and I saw some stuff in the chat. So I'll be really fast about it. I think I have 5 minutes. So the dialogue was as valuable as it was lengthy, and clearly an indication of enthusiasm and genuine concern for all of us as stakeholders. One issue that came up that started the dialogue really came from Koyaba. I'm not sure who the person was speaking, but she pointed out the concern of misrepresentation and representation of Grenada's history and heritage. Adriana spoke of concerns surrounding the project, specifically duplicated effort and communication between individuals and organizations, and therefore creating a knowledge gap that we would want to avoid. She's also concerned about the openness of caretakers and gatekeepers to join in our combined effort. And related to the first point, the motivation of people involved as the first point of contact between tourists and residents and a given ICH. Nigel mentioned our homework exercise will help us arrive at a process of negotiation to form a collective entity out of the many that are stakeholders. The general consensus of the group is that there should be an archive and data system developed and a determination about where it should be stored. A question was asked prior to the break about where we are with respect to our roles in safeguarding ICH. And I have to apologize there. I went back to the film, the recording, but all I could do is just rely on memory. I know that Peter said something, and I apologize, I don't know your last name. Danny Donnellan made a comment, Grenada Tourism Authority and the Grenada Cultural Foundation. Nigel's point under knowledge. I'm moving on into knowledge. Quote, the success of the implementation of the convention in Grenada will depend on a vibrant, active community engaged in safeguarding its ICH through its practice, transmission, interaction, engagement, posting of events or activities to the point that there is a vibrant cultural life. And Nigel truly stressed throughout the importance of having active community engagement. So we went into Unit 4 under knowledge again. We talked about the roles of communities, groups, and individuals and discerning what that would look like in terms of layers of participation. So I thought it was worthwhile to also mention, I'm scrolling, Grenada's accomplishments in terms of obligations and rights. I thought it was really great to kind of feel there's a foundation already ready for us, and we just have to build on it. Specifically, Grenada has already reported to the ICH committee, paid its contribution to the ICH fund, applied for international assistance, and developed and participated in regional workshops and networks in our regional community. Specifically, what comes to mind is Michael Jessamy and his work with the heritage sites in cooperation with St. Vincent. Grenada's road ahead includes facilitation, and this is the stuff we pretty much are embarking on now, I think. Facilitation of community access to research, adopting a code of ethics, sensitizing the public to the importance and threats of ICH in Grenada, and promoting safeguarding best practices. There was also a concern for supporting formal and non-formal education on ICH. And we talked about the engagement of communities in 8 key areas to help them safeguard their ICH. Unit 5, under raising awareness, we talked about the definition of raising awareness and the values of recognition, respect, and enhancement. Awareness is raised through traditional and non-traditional methods such as media outlets, workshops, networks, and the development of ICH policies, which I thought was interesting. That is a great way to raise awareness, is through policy and discussion about policy. The others are obvious, the media and messages and the typical approach, not typical, I shouldn't say that, but the standard of approaching school systems and making sure that the messages are heard by our young people. So under suggestions, there were several. Maria suggested the GTA program to train and certify tour guides should be reintroduced. Angus suggested there be a review of historical markings and drove the point that ownership of the data is important. Public awareness should drive the point of culture being inclusive and not exclusive with regard to tenure, age, or gender. There was some discussion in the chat about the Grenada cultural policy, so there is a general suggestion there to read it and be familiar with it. Same thing with the convention, as we learned as we went through the units yesterday. We also need to consider the opportunity for the Grenada National Trust to be accredited and familiarize oneself with the ICH NGO Forum webpage. Peter suggested in the chat that we stage an annual or every 2 years National Heritage Conference or symposium of stakeholders. And finally, and for this, I'll probably need some help with some wording. It's not official, it's just my notes. The general discussion indicated that there was a consensus that the Grenada National Trust and the Grenada Cultural Foundation should establish a formal relationship or cooperative with regard to safeguarding Grenada's ICH, initiating measures for the safeguarding of monuments, inventorying, and storing data of Grenada's cultural heritage. It's a mouthful, but that's pretty much what we're trying to accomplish, I think. From the last piece, from the chat, I did make mention of the U.S. Library of Congress and the return of materials to the family here on Carriacou, specifically the Fleary family. Adriana mentioned that there's a recent project or initiative approved by UNESCO to rescue and digitize archives. Yuri mentioned that funding opportunities are mainly established under conventions with specific outcomes. Donalyn made the cultural policy available to us. I also mentioned the 2035 Sustainable Development Plan not having ICH mentioned. Friedel Logi, I'm almost finished. Friedel Logi, and apology if I'm not saying your name correctly, stated that we should perhaps not limit our thinking of how to store the information to merely a physical repository, that the information can be digitized and stored under the control of a national trust, the National Trust or the GTA. It should not be prodigiously expensive to set up, and it can even be a money-making enterprise if so chosen. GTA stated that it's happy to discuss their role. Oh, sorry. Yep. Well, the comment came from the GTA. Grenada Cultural Foundation is happy to discuss their role further. And Adriana raised the issue of having more than one inventorying list to ensure the representation and participation of PM. And we got homework, which I'm sure Nigel will be jumping into. So that's my report.
All right. Well done, well done.
Thank
well
you.
Done. Congratulations. Right. Thank you for that, Margaret.
No problem.
That sets us off quite nicely. So now to the homework. Before we do that, however, I just want to mention that in terms of the schedule, I've made one adjustment for today. The unit dealing with ICH and sustainable development, I will move that to the final day during that final segment where we are supposed to be doing evaluations. I will move that there because, one, because I want to get into the inventorying, continue dealing with the inventorying today and to deal with it in a way that we're getting a clearer picture. But Margaret, on Friday, we're going to put that down at the final end and to address something that you just raised, the issue, you're saying ICH does not appear in the Sustainable Development Goals. We will actually address that. Culture does appear, but it sort of permeates throughout so we'll address that when we look at ICH and the Sustainable Development Goals. But good question and good observation. Thank you all around for that. So the assignment was, let me bring it up, and there were two components. One second, sorry. So if you are involved or have been involved with an ICH element in Grenada, write a short reflection on how the various stakeholders are involved with the element. For example, the practitioners, families, NGOs, communities, craftsmen, and so on. And then if you work with a state organization or institution, write a short reflection on what you believe the organization can do to help with the implementation of the convention in Grenada for the purpose of keeping we culture alive. So if we can take, because of time constraints, we'd like to take maybe 2 and 2. We want to hear from a couple of practitioners or persons involved with ICH. And then we also want to hear from a couple of persons working with state institutions. Again, this will help us to address what Ezra raised at the very beginning. How do we pull all of it together? If we can begin to state how we see ourselves being involved, then that will help us to bring the pieces together. So could we have any volunteers, please, in terms of the first part of the homework? Any volunteers out there, any practitioners or persons involved with an ICH element?
Nigel, since I've been talking, I just keep on talking, I guess. I got I have, oh, sorry, my camera's off. I have a consulting company, and we're in dialogue with a corporate partner to try to bring back sailing for young people to Carriacou. And that is a high, in my opinion, my personal. I'm not a native kayak. My husband's the kayak, but I got it through osmosis. I'm a kayak now. To see children walk around here and not have anything to do with an ocean around them in a green economy is disappointing. So we thought to talk to corporate partners to get sailing back for young people on Carriacou, which has to do with transference. It has to do with supporting as an actor in ICH for the children. It's also for the older people who are sailing. There's also another part of this that, unless you're into sailing, you would not know, but you age out of sailing as a competitive sport at 15. And here, as well as Grenada on the mainland, and I'm sure in PM, children are aging out before they realize that they can't just go out and compete and participate at will. They have to be trained. They have to be able to sail safely. We have to have, everything from boats tailing them in a race to equipment. It's very expensive, but it has to be done if we're going to survive it, survive the negligence to our young people on this point. We wanted to include something as simple as CPR, which is not ICH, but it has to do with their ability to do this. So it's quite an undertaking, but that's our contribution for whatever it's worth. And I hope that it happens soon.
Okay, thank you for that, Margaret. So is that a traditional element in Grenada, right?
And Carriacou is part of our ICH, honestly. I think Danny mentioned to the group yesterday, the oldest regatta in the Caribbean is here. Excellent. So sailing is in our blood. I sail, and I learned how to sail as a kid, but I now sail again because I'm here. So it's part of being here.
Excellent, really. Excellent. Are the boats traditionally built by any chance?
Yes, that's what you heard GTA mention yesterday about the wooden boats.
Okay, good. That sounds like a good project.
I'm in the middle of a conference.
A good initiative. All right, and it's supported widely by the people on the island.
It is a conversation every regatta as to how we're going to get young people included and involved in sailing again. The last time that we had a true COVID-free regatta, they had a special program set aside for children. I think, I'm trying to remember who did that. I think it was Allison had organized and made sure they had a set aside program for children. And they had that on the Esplanade, and I understand it very well, but you have to acculturate children to this. And it has to come in early enough that they can do something about it. At 13, what can I teach you? To race at 15. Because you're not a mosquito, you're not an optimist, you can't get in a big boat. What are we gonna do with you? But now you have the high incidence of our adolescents being lost. A lost generation. They don't know what to do with themselves.
Okay,
so we're letting YouTube raise them.
So, in just looking at it, so what you have done, you have identified the current situation, and you are projecting for further safeguarding and transmission. That is what I'm hearing in terms
Correct.
of putting it in ICH terms. So excellent. All right, thank you for that, Margaret. Kay, did you want to share something? Kay, Julian? Did you want to share?
No, I did not.
Okay. Are there any other practitioners, knowledge bearers, persons?
I guess I can share something.
Okay.
I've been involved with the Shakespeare Mass in Carriacou. I've been with Rena Mills. As part of the GTA, it's part of a GTA project, I guess, and they were looking for UNESCO listing, part of that process. So I was more on the research end of it, working with people on the ground in Carriacou and filling in the necessary application form for that. Rena was involved, Rena and Neil were involved on the ground in collecting the data, interviewing people who have been involved in Shakespeare Mass for decades, working with the people who are currently doing Shakespeare Mass, recording them, going through all of the different, aspects of how the Mass is basically prepared, carried out and things like that. And even looking at some of the aspects of, how it is taught to children today as part of schools and different projects. So looking at the entire realm of it with the idea of not just writing about it and recording the knowledge, but how is this transmitted? How do we keep this going? Because as you with many other things, as Margaret just talked about, we have lost the almost natural transmission of many aspects of the culture. So we've had to come up with different ways of how do we continue that, and especially using the school system, which most of these things happen in the community, but now we have to go towards the school because that is where we do, a lot of our learning. So that was quite interesting, and I think it probably is a lesson in how, we will look at doing some of these other elements in Carriacou as well. And I know they also worked on the boat building as well, but that's other people worked on that. I did not work on that one, but it's trying to basically complete the circle in looking at how we continue to transmit these elements, because we find them essential to the culture of the places. So.
Yeah, thank you, Angus. With respect to Shakespeare's masks, what's the reach of community participation?
It's pretty huge. The masquerade is actually comes out of the communities. So the participation is across the board. We're talking about it's not just a few individuals, it's really the community, because it's a competitive mass. So communities compete against each other. So there's a lot of support in almost every aspect of it from the community.
All right, thank you for that. So
and someone from Carriacou, if want to add anything, I don't know if Margaret wants to add anything.
That's the idea, being able to.
But I apologize. Sorry.
I was just going to say, Margaret, being able to visualize the scope of participation. The wider it is, the better it is for viability, right? And that's the core of that idea. Go ahead, Margaret, and then we'll hear from Andrea and then Marlene.
Oh, I was just going to ask Angus to DM me his email address.
Okay, thank you.
Say that again.
Your email address, send it to me in the chat if you don't mind. Okay,
sure.
Okay, and Andrea McLeod?
Yes, please. I think it sort of leads on quite well from what Angus was saying about Shakespeare Mass and Carriacou. And, since day one, the Shakespeare Mass has been coming up a lot. In terms of the reflection, I teach art and design at TA Marischal in Community College in Tantine. So one of the ideas for links, what could institutions do? Of course, we've got TA Marischal campus in 6 Roads, Carriacou. And in terms of student exchange, the students being able to go over to Carriacou, they just had the carnival and the Shakespeare Mass, to be able to go to participate and to see how that actually works and interact with their colleagues who are attending college at 6 Roads, I think would be a great way to, from what can institutions do, a great thing that the college could set up or get involved with. And I just wanted to add that actually a Shakespearean, Glenroy Boswain, he's over here in Grenada at the moment, and he was meant to attend, but he's not been very well. But last week, he did actually come in to TAMCC and do a workshop with both year groups for my art students. And so I just wanted to share that as well, because the first year art students now, when I set the project, they're doing 3D work, installation work. And I set it to the theme of Shakespeare Mass. And I asked them, who's heard of Shakespeare Mass? And I was surprised that none of them had. So they, looked at some articles and so on in preparation for his visit. And it was such a successful workshop. And the standout, I've got a mask here, actually. This was sort of my one. So he came to do the mask with them. And we didn't have time to do more aspects of the whole costume, such as the crown and so on. But he was able to demonstrate, perform some of the dialogue. And the students got that hands-on, to make the mask. At the start of the workshop, one of the students said to me, they're not interested in culture. They don't, it's boring, it's just, you know, old stuff, and they don't see the point. And then hearing Shakespeare on top of that, they said, oh, and Shakespeare as well. By the end of the workshop, the same student came back to me and said, these have been the best 2 days of my life. And I was just blown away by that, because, you know, they were able to reimagine, to make masks that represent them, but still use the traditional, typical techniques. Plus they had the actual person there, and you know, he wasn't in costume, but when he started to perform, and the way he moved his body and all of that, the projection, the dialogue, it just really sparked their imagination. And that was in a classroom setting. I think to push this idea further, it'd be really great if we could see groups of students from Grenada at that level sharing and mixing with those at Six Roads campus in Carriacou. And also there's another campus up in St. Patrick as well. So, you know, taking students from Tantine to St. Patrick's campus, that type of exchange as well. What are they doing up there compared to what do we do down here? Because even though Grenada is quite small, what I've noticed is that the students aren't necessarily exposed to all aspects of the culture around the island.
That you know what I observed about what you described there. You would think that based on the strict definition of ICH, that you're not focusing on the mask itself, but you're dealing with the creative side. But you're actually helping to safeguard the mask by using it as a. So that's actually. I don't know if you want to call it the indirect, but a way, it's a very creative way of safeguarding.
Symbiotic.
Right? Yeah, it's a symbiotic relationship there that's been developed. So congratulations on that. Very creative and thinking outside the box, you know? So you have them thinking about culture in a different way, through a different lens, a lens that they might understand better. So congratulations on that. Thank you. Marlene? Marlene? Oh, Marlene is
I don't think she can hear you.
I think it looks like, yeah, the camera is frozen there. All right, I saw Angus George. Angus, did you want to say something?
I'm really here to observe and hear and listen to see how I play a part in this. I'm actually in Toronto, Canada. And it's 8 o'clock this morning, 8 o'clock, and I unfortunately just getting up to start my day, but I'm very thoroughly impressed on what I've heard in the last 10 to 15 minutes, and I'm looking forward to seeing how I can play my part as, I guess, part of the Grenadian diaspora. Want to see where I fit in, as well as where others that are in Toronto or in America can fit in to cultivate and continue the work that this organization is doing.
All right, thank you, Angus. We have a message coming in here from Eugenia. Am I saying it correctly? Eugenia O'Neill. Eugenia, would you mind sharing with the group, please? Then we'll do Rena and then Tahira, and then we'll wrap up there. Eugenia O'Neill, are you there? Okay. Okay, she's having some problems, so let me just read what she's been saying here. So masquerade designed for carnival involved many people: the designer, the wire bender, the seamstresses, the fabric stores, the people who cook for the people in the mass camp, and the mass camp members themselves. Mass camps were a cottage industry. Okay, good. Right. And so Carnival itself, do you guys consider Carnival itself to be an ICH of Grenada? Okay, good. Right, and she outlined the various actors, the various stakeholders, and the roles that they play. And so that is a good example of wide community participation. Some people will just go to observe, of course, but you have others who actually get involved with in the mass camps, who get involved with the making of costumes and designing and all that, right? And so that is a good example that involves a large number of persons. Okay, Rena from the Grenada Tourism Authority. I think Rena will now address the question from the perspective of institutions. Is that right, Rena? Thank you.
Good morning. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Well, presently I am out on the field doing some work. So I want to thank Angus for starting the discussion. But just to add to what he mentioned, the question of participation. I'm getting a feedback. Hello?
Could you mute yourselves, please? Go ahead.
Yes, just to add to what he spoke about in the area of participation, just to jump in there, last year being part of the project and physically being on the field, interviewing former mass players and present mass players. It is something that is vastly participated by locals from all the different communities throughout Carriacou. And I can tell you that the mass is split up into different communities. For example, the communities to the south of the island is known as Banroy, to the north of the island, Hero, and to the central as Freeport. It is something participated both by males and females. The females are the one who leads the band into tongue, leads the mass players into tongue, singing and chanting. They can tell you it starts from even weeks before the community coming together to make the costume, to paper the crowns, reciting lines while waiting and coming up against each other. So it is something that is participated, as I said, vastly in different communities throughout Carriacou.
Okay. Thank you, Rena. Rena, do you have you work for the Tourism Authority with respect to the second question on what can institutions do? Do you have a perspective on that?
What can institutions do to what? Preserve the mass?
To assist with the implementing the convention on a whole, and based on the discussions that we've had this week. Or continue to do, I should say. Because things have been happening, no?
Yeah, so we just have to keep at the top of our minds and top of the place what our traditions are, what is expected to be done. For example, in the area of training, we have to bring it to different schools, and it's something that we at the Grenada Tourism Authority, we started in 2016, for example, in the area of Shakespeare Mass, with other traditions, for example, string band music, big drum. So we have to keep it in the schools. While in the schools, then it will branch out to different communities, because we know that the children will take it home to their parents, take it into the communities, and once it starts with the children, then it is there to stay. So I think that is something that we need to do, training, a lot of training.
So one of the things I'm picking up on here, and maybe maybe the others might want to comment on this. Do you find that the school is where would be the best place for, because this project itself has a major component, no? Mm-hmm. You find that developing transmission or education mechanisms through the schools, do you think that will be the best bet for Grenada? Or
I think so. I think so. As I mentioned, once it starts in the school, then we know that it is there to stay. So we have to find a way of including that as part of the curricular, cultural education, getting children at a young age to understand their traditions, what it means to them. Because I can tell you, being part of it and being a part of the Culture Train String Band, when we started, I know that some of the children, they were not into it, I must say. But when we started the sessions, teaching them what it is, what's about, how we got here, and educating them about this, then they've got very much involved. And not even by the year, every month or every day, you will hear children coming to us, oh, when you're starting back the training, because I want to be part of it. Before, we weren't hearing that, but now we're hearing it. So I think getting them to understand, and once the children are part of it, then we know it is there for generations.
Rena, so if I understand correctly, you're saying that the Tourism Authority directly implemented a project like that in schools?
We've been doing training every year. Every year we set aside a budget for cultural training. And as part of the cultural training, for example, when it comes, well, in 2016, as I mentioned, we did a training in the area of Shakespeare Mass, and coming close to Carnival Festival every year, because Shakespeare Mass is featured during the Carnival, we have someone go to school to give a refresher course for like 2 to 3 weeks. We've been going to schools in Petit Martinique, teaching them string band music, teaching them big drum. The schools in Carriacou as well, both primary and secondary schools. Every year we set aside something in the area of cultural education.
So you do, and you employ the practitioners and knowledge bearers.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so you do have a number of things going on. That's good. All right, thank you, Rena. Tahira?
Nigel, may I come in, please?
Go ahead, Newton. Go ahead.
Right. I'll take a contrary view from the last speaker. And I do not mean to be too contrary, but I think a point has to be made. Nearly everything that is, where there's a shortage in society, people are saying go to schools. Schools have got specific work to do. Reading, writing, and sums. This is what the community, this is what the nation expects. However, there are other barriers, practical barriers. We cannot take things to schools just like that. We have to go through the proper channels, especially in Grenada. For the sort of activities we're talking about, anywhere there is a human activity, adults, children around those people will learn. And this project has a huge education school element, but we cannot advocate just practitioners from other parts of society just going into schools. Schools have rules, the safety for children against adults, the safety in others. So let us keep things in perspective, please. Because I don't want us to leave this exercise, go and say we can dump it all, and I don't mean dump in a sense, put it all to school and expect it to happen. Let's keep it in perspective, please.
Excellent observation, and so that will be the challenge for whatever system you set up there nationally. That will be the challenge to know what that balance is, no? Yes. With respect to the use of the formal education system, but keeping in mind that you do have formal, you do have non-formal and informal mechanisms as well, right? These might show up as your extracurricular activities. These might show up as your weekend workshops for children. You know, so there are other ways to deal with it, you know?
Of course,
right.
Of course. I mean,
thank you.
Just one more point. Earlier, somebody mentioned the rule of what in Grenada they call the media. I think that's an awful phrase. But the community, newspapers, television, radio, they have a role to play, and they're not doing it in Grenada. So that's an avenue we can go down with that. Yeah, we can use that avenue, but please understand, schools have got a formal role to play. and that is teaching the children reading, writing, and sums.
Okay, thank you for that, Newton. And let's go Marlene, then Adriana.
Good morning, everyone. I remember going to school, and I've always been very involved in culture. And the things I remember from school, apart from the math and the writing and the reading, are those experiences that have shaped my life. And while those academic subjects are important, I think we need to understand as a nation that we have different children with different abilities. And if we cater only for those who are off the bat academically inclined, we are leaving out a whole set of children, especially right now. So I do respect Mr. Newton's comment, but I believe that the school has to prepare its citizens to meet the needs of the nation, and our culture and our civic awareness and our heritage is very much a part of that educational process. As far as elements are concerned, there are two elements that I'm involved in directly because I choose to make it a personal project, that being the Maypole and Parang. And Parang, I must say for me, because I spent much of my childhood in Trinidad, is not the Carriacou Parang. So I became aware of that later in life. And as a Catholic, the Parang had its roots in the Catholic Church and its practices. That's where I learned a lot of the Parang songs. And what
so you sing, you actually sing, Marlene? You sing Parang?
Yes, I do.
Interesting, interesting, yes, interesting. Yes. Oh, good.
And so we got booklets and recordings from Trinidad, and we learned that we have a group called Gifted, well, at least had dormant right now. And that was the aim, to learn it and to share it. So what was created, and that's one of the things that was spoken about before in the workshop, is the establishment of events or festival or activities to showcase these things that you value. So in the parish of St. David, as far as schools are concerned, one thing, I'm not sure if you remember, Governor General Sir Paul School brought over from Trinidad the idea of having carols by candlelight a long time ago. And that was done within the communities, using the schools and the church choirs. So that is one thing that was done in St. David's up to a couple of years ago, where all the schools were invited to participate. And the children would learn these songs and you would create a story. And they would come together on an evening. Parents would come out, teachers would come out, dressed beautifully, and they would do their carols by candlelight. We'd have a kind of a vigil with candles and so. And one of the songs they did was Parang, a Parang song. And that was very meaningful. A number of things happened and schools did not participate as much as before. And so to evolve based on that challenge, what we're doing right now is having caroling and Parang in the community. And the parish of St. David has about 50-something little communities. So what we would have done is cluster them into groups. And so for the 2 weeks before Christmas, we'll go from one community to the other. This year we had a truck and we have our instruments. We had a range, so we had to cover up in funny ways, but stop at various places. And we were never able to finish the route because you always got things to drink. It's Grenada. You all had persons say, give us one more song. It is really a fun experience. And because the other element that I am committed to is that of Maypole, I included that and integrated that into the process. And even some of the Parang singers and was in the center, Maypole is carnival. I said, no, Maypole is anything you want to make it. So I changed the color of the ribbon into red and white, and we would plant the Maypole, and in every community, we would dance the Maypole. So we dubbed it Community Maypole. And it's amazing to see, it didn't take very long. I have 5 rules: rhythm in your feet, even spaces, And you just tell them that and you start doing it. You have a maple song. I hear all what say. The road made to walk. And I hear they say they go be partisan, but if they ever interfere, so partisan, you explain what that means. And you go ahead in that kind of a way. So Parang and caroling, carol singing is now blended with maypole. And so that is one of the things that is happening now in the parish of St. David. But a few years ago, when I just came back from study, the Junior Achievers project, we took on that challenge and created at the St. David's Catholic Secondary School a cultural keepers club. And in that particular club, that's what we did. After school, you had students who were interested. So we didn't put it in the curriculum, but after school, the children will come out, those interested in culture, and the numbers grew. And we had persons who were the bearers of various elements of our culture come in. So persons like the European Banfield, you would have a person, Mr. DT, came in to do the lancers and those kind of things. And the children, for years, it lasted for about 4 years, I think about 5 years, they learned how to do the maypole and how to play the ring games, such that during the independence season, we would have 3 concerts. We would go into the school, so Crochet RC school, Cromwell students would sometimes come up, St. David's RC, and they would showcase and they would teach. And later on, we had schools asking for the cultural keepers to come to them. So they would go to, I remember them going to Grenada.
Marlene, you've covered quite a bit of ground, and I don't want to cut you off, but if you could just wrap up there, please. I know I certainly applaud you seem to be involved with many, and you've illustrated how the wide cross-section of communities being involved. Are you doing this yourself, or are you doing it through your work or so on? This is just your own interest, right?
As a teacher.
As a teacher. Excellent, 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 excellent.
And
but Marlene, I'd be curious to hear some more about it. But in the interest of time, I just want to get a couple other persons to speak.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. I thank you as well for sharing, okay? I keep forgetting. Yes. Yes, who's that? I keep forgetting Tahira.
Yes.
Tahira, sorry.
Nigel?
Good morning, everybody.
Sorry, Tahira. Ezra, you had something?
Yeah, we had conversations about where are we going to, what's going to be the place we're going to launch this safeguarding of ICH. And I think there's a consensus based on the messages that's coming in that it seems as though we have to start off in the schools. I think it's a very efficient place to do it. But there are a few things that has to happen. We have to establish what type of standard what body of knowledge we want to get across the students. So that requires some type of curriculum, and then the materials and so on to drive the curriculum. So there's some work there, but I think we have schools, we have the physical structure there, we have students, we have a policy, we have all this data that was shared today and yesterday and Monday. And I think we just have to get organized now. So I really want to thank the folks for sharing those great things that's happening. But I think we have a vehicle to drive a safeguarding of ICH.
Okay, thank you for that intervention, Ezra. And then back to you, Tahira.
Nigel, may I come in briefly, please?
So, Newton, every time Tahira is to speak, someone interjects for some reason. I don't know what they have against Tahira.
And I think I'm going to take over the person and take the floor.
Go ahead, Tahira, and we'll come
Good
back.
morning,
Sorry.
everybody. Some of the points that Marlene make as a teacher, it's valid, but one of the challenges that, as I'm seeing for the last couple of days, most people are mentioning that it can happen in school. But my idea is, since we have those community organizations, those different festivals that take place within the parishes, what they can start to do is to put these components as part of the festival. Like you could have the ring games, folk songs, traditional mass corner. So you invite the schools and the children come and partake, not just by being in the classroom, because you don't want them to be passive learners. And when you come in the classroom and you just talk, the information reach just a few children. But if you get the children directly involved in a natural setting, it has a lot more impact. Those children learn it there, they come back in the classroom, and it can be integrated in any subject area. They can write about it, they can create projects in social studies, they can have oral presentation. So if those community like Rainbow City Festival, St. Patrick's Day, Fisherman's Birthday, and start putting these cultural elements that we are looking to safeguard into those festivals, and schools get to experience them. The children bring back the knowledge into the classroom. You reach a wide variety of children that way, as opposed to just selecting a few schools, because let's be realistic, some principals are not going to go for it. And then we hamper. Whereas if these organizations set up these activities and you invite the schools, then you have a wide cross-section of children getting involved from primary go right up. So maybe that's one of the things that as we go forward, we could, the organization like the National Trust, Grenada Cultural Foundation, National Museum, we know that heritage, I think they say February is designated as Heritage Month. So maybe we can start looking at putting these aspects in that time of the month, in that time of the year, and getting schools involved. So then it grows with the children. You know, you send it. So that is my thing for how we can safeguard.
Excellent intervention, Tahira. Thank you very much for that. We'll take
Nigel.
one more, and then
Nigel, I'll try to be very brief, please.
Wait.
Newton,
Okay.
Sir, Newton, I'll come right to you, but let me get a couple other speakers.
Fair enough, thank you.
Let's go with Ib, Maya.
Pastor Ib, yeah. Yeah.
Morning. I just wanted to add that Miss Gloria Bonaparte, who is also with us this morning, and I and others have actually been working on a resource guide for children of grades 5 and 6. We have 10, I believe at the moment, 10 categories for ICH. The resource guide is being currently gathered, which will include lesson plans that tie into the various subject matters. So as an addition, so the resource guide would be available to anyone and everyone, have the information. So I just wanted to interject that we concur with everything that you've said, and actually the National Trust is actually proceeding down that road as we speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Ib. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has certainly generated a lot of discussion. We will cut off here now. I'd ask you, Ezra is making note of the various comments. I'd like to ask if you can put it in the chat, please, so that Ezra can take account of it, because as you know, he's functioning as a sort of rapporteur, moderator, where he's compiling all of these ideas to bring it into focus as we proceed through the week, certainly starting tomorrow and then on Friday. So please make your comments. This is, I must commend you. The discussions we're having are covering a lot of what need the negotiation process with respect to implementing the convention. And what we're seeing coming out now are the nuances, no? The finer points as to how we might have to proceed. What I foresee happening, and I'm putting this on Daryl here, what I foresee happening based on the live discussions, you may have to have a separate session to ventilate these sorts of things, no? But I can see a framework coming into place, and I'll share that with Daryl here as the week progresses, actually probably later today. But I can see that there's a need for a broader discussion just to bring things into focus, no? But congratulations on the active participation there. So what I want to proceed now to the issue of identification and inventorying. We started looking at that yesterday, and let me pull that up there, is there a couple of things I want to share with you in terms of further documentation. No? 1 second here. Please let me know if you can see the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Okay. So we were looking at that. We started looking at that yesterday. And we looked at what the convention says about identification and inventorying, why inventories were needed, planning and inventorying projects, examples of inventorying processes. We're going to get to the second half of this year in a second. Again, so it's one of the Article 11, again, just to recap, talks about identification of ICH with the participation of communities. That's we understand that clearly from based on Margaret's recap. It is to be done with a view to safeguard, right? That is the essence of the convention. And here are the various reasons we determined that inventories were needed. Dorian, I think, reminded us of that this morning. He emphasized that point, that the inventories help us to understand the landscape and therefore to determine what needs to be done with respect to its safeguarding overall. No? We talked about gender and identification and inventorying, that gender, you want to seek as a basic rule gender balance in this process, and gender participation, I think, would be the better term to use in all aspects. You want to be aware that in the process, we're not marginalizing groups, we're not applying our own biases and projecting it onto communities, groups, and individuals, and that it should be a space for dialogue and gender awareness. No? So you want open communication, certainly, but with respect and respecting the rights of communities in terms of granting access to particular ICH elements. Again, in terms of leeway, you want to set up an inventory so that it fits your situation at home, there in Grenada. And then the restrictions include, of course, identifying and defining, working with communities, safeguarding, respect, updating your inventory is something I emphasized earlier in the morning, and then reporting on. Of course, you already have this sort of experience in the past 2 years with respect to implementing the convention. Now, the scope and size of inventories, we asked the question, generally, do you want a single inventory there in Grenada, or will you need 3 separate island inventories, or do you have a national inventory which incorporates all 3 elements from all 3 islands? However you do it though, a thing that I thought about yesterday was that if you're whatever you're going to nominate, let's say for argument's sake, you want to inscribe an element from Grenada at the international level on one of the lists, the representative list, the urgent safeguarding list, or the register of good safeguarding practices. Let's say you want to do the sailing in Carriacou, right? When that is inscribed, remember, it is going to be inscribed for this on behalf of the state of Grenada, no? Of course, the details of it, that it is a typical or traditional in Carriacou, will be a part of the description of the element. But altogether, whether you have a one national inventory or various inventories, the idea is that it will still be representing the state, no, of Grenada. All right. So the scope and size of the inventories will vary depending on the aim, the available resources, and the methods of information generation and systematization. A word on that last bullet there, and one of the things I observed in the morning as we've been talking about it, you have information, some information already available, but it's out there in various spaces. So one of the challenges you will have will be to see what's available and then see how that fits into whatever system you'll put in place to conduct the further inventory. No? So now, in terms of organizing the information here, it is against the spirit of the convention to create hierarchies. We talked about that. No element is more important than the other. because that's like saying one community or one practitioner is more important than another set of practitioners or individuals. And that's certainly not the purpose of the convention. In terms of organizing the information, some state parties used the non-exhaustive set of domains in Articles 2.2. We looked at that, but I mentioned to you that you may have your own system internally. But once you begin to participate at the international level, you will want to use the domains within the convention for that particular purpose, but it does not stop you from using your own systems, no? So for example, Daryl showed us that list this morning of possible elements to begin to inventory on that. I think that was a website. Is that right, Daryl? Is that a website or was that a database? Yeah, it was a website, right?
Yeah.
And so what you see there, you see cultural celebration. So the question would be if you wanted to inscribe something at the international level, cultural festivals would fall under one of the domains, perhaps the domains dealing with festivals, performing arts, and so on. It can be, some elements, by the way, can cover several domains, no? So that is also important to keep in mind, and we'll see a document which guides us in that process here in a minute. So as a third point here, whatever classification system is used, it is important that it facilitates appropriate access to the information by the communities concerned and by other stakeholders. I think this was brought up on day one. The people of Carriacou are overburdened, they're coming to them and they don't see any byproduct of it, and so on. So those communities, whether in Carriacou or elsewhere in Grenada, their ability to access the information that they provide is critical, no? They should be able to walk into the trust or the foundation or the museum or wherever was and be able to access that information, all right? Using existing inventories, we don't have, from what I can tell, you don't have existing inventories, but you do have some work that has been undertaken, no? But I want to move directly to the third point here. Older inventories may require updating, and this is I don't recall who raised it this morning. It's not in terms of the work ahead, it's not, it's very, you might think of it as duplication, but it's very hard to duplicate work in ICH. What actually you want is to be able to, and it's not quite yet a part of our regional tradition, with the exception of some places, but what you want over time, you want ideally within next 100 years, you want to be able to keep an element viable, but also be able to track how it has changed over that period of time, right? To see how it has remained viable from generation to generation, but also be able to see how it has changed from generation to generation, no? All right, so I'm just thinking, for example, how does that look visually? I'm just thinking the example of Shakespeare's mask. You know, maybe the masks were produced to have particular facial features, right? And but over time, you notice that the children or the practitioners start using more modern, or what you'd call it, modern animations or images to put on the mask. I think I've heard of a scenario like that, right? Who knows, they might start, maybe Daryl is a local folk caricature and figure, and they might want Daryl's face might end up on one of the masks, you know? But the question would be, you say, well, that's not authentic anymore, some people might argue. But some people might argue, no, it's the skills remain associated with making the mask remain, and the masks continue to be made, but they're just using now their context and their reality to make representations of the mask, no? So those are the sorts of things to be aware of. So you can't duplicate necessarily, you can add to. I think that would be the best way to describe it with respect to existing information. It's always best to add to, and not to think of it as duplication. There was the issue of free, prior, and informed consent. We look at that in more detail, but whenever we talk about community engagement in the inventorying process, one of the things you want to look at is this issue of sustained consent, meaning, can we continue to engage? Do we have your permission to continue to engage in this process of inventorying, updating, and so on? And it's a symbiotic thing too, to borrow the word that Darrell used earlier. It's a symbiotic thing, because if you're going to rely on communities to create the inventory, you will also need to rely on communities to update the inventory, right? That's key, because again, you don't want to run the risk of looking at something through your eyes, thinking that it will remain the same. It's not static, things are always changing. And so the communities are the best indicators and describers of how things have changed and how they remain the same, all right? So now the criteria for inclusion. The criteria for including elements in an inventory should be clear and transparent and in line with the convention. That is, creating dialogue and understanding among communities and promoting respect for each other's ICH. That is the spirit of the convention, right? And that is where the vibrancy comes from, no? And that dialogue will help you to understand what system you will put in place for inclusion on an element. And what do I mean? What are some of the things to think about there? Okay, we have this workshop, people we trained, and we will go on and we'll do community inventorying. And then the question becomes, but how does something end up on an inventory just because we inventoried it? Well, you might think of having a committee of an ICH committee that meets quarterly. I'm just putting it out there, what you can use your own system. An ICH committee that meets quarterly, that's comprised of persons, a cross-section of persons, institutions, government institutions, NGO, individual practitioners, and so on. So you get a cross-section and you create this committee, and together they're the ones that will review the information that has been brought forward and say, okay, this is ready for inscription and inclusion on our inventory. Because you want to have a particular standard for doing it, no? Based on how you understand it. So this is what we mean by it being clear and transparent. And then if you do it every 3 months for argument's sake, or every 6 months or every year, the transparent part comes where the media comes in. You call in the media, ladies and gentlemen of the media, welcome people of Grenada. Today we are announcing the inscription of Shakespeare's Masque and boat sailing in Carriacou, and the quadrille dances from Tivoli onto the National Inventory of Intangible Cultural Heritage of Grenada, right? So I'm just explaining it in a more practical way as to how, this is how you build broad support. This is how you make things transparent, no? And then when you're doing that press conference for argument's sake, after you've done the assessments, after you've decided to include it, you will, at the press conference, you will have the communities that represent the various elements at the press conference, and the media will interview them, and they will be able to speak on it. And this is the sort of thing that we're talking about, the vibrancy, you know, if you can picture it in those terms, no? Mm-hmm. Now, the convention does not prevent states parties from using their own definitions of ICH at the national level, but I mentioned this a few times before. For example, in inventorying, but any elements nominated to one of the lists must comply with the convention's definition, okay? So Darrell, on that list you showed me this morning, that is something to certainly consider, no? How will you categorize and classify? So you have different types of descriptors there, but you'll still want to attach them just so that you don't have to worry about it later on, in a sense. What particular domains are they a part of, no? So here's a case study, and we're getting closer to what I want to really get at in terms of identifying and safeguarding Estonian handicraft. So what did they inventory? So they have this thing about traditional knitting and making woven products. But that in itself was only a part of the picture. what they inventoried as well was the skills needed to create the traditional products and the skills that were used to develop the traditional patterns. And you notice here, even in new products. So this reminded me of what, was it Marlene that showed us the mask earlier? Marlene, was that you? Showed us the mask?
No,
Andrea, right? So thank you, and thank you. So you notice there that the creativity that, yes, Andrea, the creativity there created new products, but the skills remained the same. And what they inventory is they describe the products, how it's knitted, where they come from, but they also inventory the skills that are used, no? Even if it involves making new patterns and so on, it's this particular skill that is the ICH component of it. But they go part and parcel, right? The knitting works that are produced, the pieces that are produced are part and parcel of the skills. The two go together. So this is an idea. When you're doing your inventorying, think of the tangible and the skills associated with it. And when you're doing your descriptions and so on, the two will appear together in your descriptions, because what's the use of knowing how to build a boat, but you don't have evidence of the boat to show, no? That sort of thing. So the two go together, right? Access to information about the element. So Article 13 says, each state shall endeavor to adopt measures aimed at ensuring access to ICH while respecting customary practices, governing access to specific aspects of such ICH. So we talked about that earlier as well. There are various ways to do it. Yesterday, after the workshop, we had an after workshop discussion. And one of the things that came up, okay, how can they access? Do we have a website that they can go to, right? That's one means. What I've seen some states do, they have websites, but with various degrees of access, right? So there's some persons who will be able to go in and actually edit work on the website. Some persons can access particular types of videos. So there are different degrees of access, but the idea is you should, and the reason, part of the reason for degrees of access to is because some things the communities might allow you to inventory it, to document and inventory it, but they don't want it in the public domain, right? And so it is for the purposes of documentation, it's there, but they don't want it shared with the public, but it still should be accessible to those particular communities, no? Right, you in your offices, when you're doing this work in your database, some files will be closed off by passwords, no? Right? It might require, and with a notation that these files can only be opened by particular persons or based on the request of particular communities, right? Because to make it public in the eyes of the community could prejudice or create misrepresentation of the element and this sort of thing. So these are the little nuances there and why you want to have you want to create a system of access, but also being aware that there are different degrees of access, right? And a note for the institutions aren't the owners, you are the caretakers. You're not the owners when it comes to ICH. It's the communities, groups, and individuals, right? And this is something to always be mindful of. Here's an interesting one. I think Tahira in the first day talked about this issue of code of ethics and the role of academics and researchers. In Australia, the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, what they have established is a code of ethics for researchers. So researchers, persons wishing to go research in those communities have to make an application process, and the code of ethics, according to their standards, are shared with the researchers. These ethics enforces customary limitations on access to indigenous ICH databases. It requires users to respect cultural sensitivities. And protocol allows indigenous control over access to sensitive items. Again, and you wouldn't believe this is something that's still happening widely around the world today. Institutions are very tempted to try and dictate to indigenous communities what sort of access they want or should be allowed, when in fact the indigenous communities, and just on their rights alone, are the ones who can choose to share or not to share particular information. Of course, this is a wider issue globally, but certainly this is something to keep in mind here. And you might use the term indigenous differently, no? I know in some countries, because of our African heritage and because of how the culture developed distinctly because of the Caribbean environment and the Caribbean experience, some persons claim that the people of the Caribbean islands, though they weren't here 1,000, 2,000 years ago, in fact, are indigenous as well, because the culture developed here. Some people make that argument, no, but that is something for you to determine in terms of your own scenario, right? So how do we go from inventories to nominations? Nominated elements to be included in an inventory of ICH present in the territories of the submitting states is a prerequisite. That's a requirement, no? So you can't send anything to UNESCO for inscription if you don't meet what is called criteria U5 and R5, and as described in operational directives 1 and 2, all right? All U5 and R5 says, I'll summarize it for you. It says, is the element a part of a national inventory, right? Were communities involved in documenting the element? Are communities involved in updating the element? Those will be the questions that will be asked of the state. And you must provide proof of inclusion of the element on the inventory required on the forms that you would fill out, no? So I'm putting this out there because that might be what you'd want to do. Some states spend time consolidating their work at home first and then move to nomination. Some states jump after a short period of time, jump straight into nomination because they use it to bolster their international profile on culture. But that's something that you can decide internally what approach you want to use, no? I note though that inventories, as far as I can tell, are almost always never complete, no? They're almost always never complete. And so, so long as an element is included on an inventory, even if that inventory is a work in progress, that is acceptable at the international level, okay? I want to point out something here now, the difference between a list and an inventory, right? You see that document that Daryl shared with us this morning with all those items listed with the various, you had teas and cultural celebrations and dances and so on. That is a list. The list might be the gateway to a more extensive inventory. So if it's on our website, if I were to click on any one of those, what should appear ideally is a more detailed description of the element with photographs, evidence of community involvement and participation, and so on, no? So the list is just that, it's a listing. But the inventory is the more detailed documentation, descriptions that go with each element that you have documented and you have included in your inventory, no? All right. So that's the best way to describe the difference between a list of and an inventory. All right. So planning and inventorying project basic task. So I'll share this with you, of course, but this is getting us to begin to think ahead now, no? You want to determine the purpose of the inventory, right? And you'll describe that in terms appropriate to you. You want to identify and involve the communities concerned and other stakeholders. So you want to get them on board from the get-go. If you see Daryl and Adriana and Tahira and Mr. Maya running around by themselves, doing all the interviewing work, which is highly impossible, you know something wrong, right? What you want are the communities concerned and the stakeholders to be identified and involved from the bell songs, no? We want to address the gender dimension of identifying and inventorying, no? And this is critical because while we assume, like in our part of the world, that, oh, well, men and women, well, we don't have that sort of issue. Some states do. It's a major issue in some states around the world, no? Women don't have certain rights, no? Women don't have certain rights. Women are not allowed to do certain things and so on, right? And just as an example, and so when you are doing your inventorying work, be sure to ensure gender balance and account for the gender dimension. And not only that too, there might be protocols within the community where, and I've had this experience where the man might not be able to interview the woman, right, in the household. And if it does happen, the husband has to be present, right? That sort of thing, right? Or the woman might not be able to interview the man because of how that society functions, those group of people function, right? So those are the kinds of dimensions when we talk about gender that you want to be aware of. You want to build a consultative mechanism and trust obtaining consent. You want to find the resources, identify and create structures for information gathering and networking. You want to do the information gathering and data entry. You want to disseminate access and update. So this is sort of like a checklist for you, ladies and gentlemen. This is sort of the stages, the steps that you will be engaged in when doing and developing your inventory of intangible cultural heritage of Grenada. All right, I want to come out of this present and show you something else now. Let me stop sharing here. Just to whet your appetites a bit. And we'll be sharing this with you course of the day here as well. Can you see a handout says Unit 6 there?
Yes.
Okay, here is an inventorying questionnaire, no? This is the meat of the matter. No. Imagine that you have already set up your processes that you want to deploy to start your inventorying of the intangible cultural heritage of Grenada. And now you want to begin to systematically do that. Here's a guide that I found very helpful, and we have adapted it certainly when I was involved with community-based inventorying. And it gives you can picture yourself, each of you as as an interviewer for argument's sake, or someone you've gone down to the carnival, you're following the carnival season, or you're following the boat building or the drumming or the drum making, Tivoli and so on. and you're immersed in it, and you're now ready to begin this inventorying process. You need to begin to collect the information. And so here's what is required. So what's the name of the element as used by the communities concerned? Not what you call it, but what the community, by what name does the community refer to it? You want to give a short informative title of the element, including the identification of the ICH domains concerned, right? A short informative title. What communities are concerned? What's the physical location or distribution frequency of the enactment of the element? So is the element located at a particular place, a street, a neighborhood? Is it pervasive across the islands? So that is what we mean by physical location and distribution frequency. A short description of the element, probably no more than 200 words. So you're out there in the field, you're taking your notes and so on. This is the collection of the information that's going on here. And sometimes what you want is to have multiple persons doing this. I know just from experience, when you put together inventorying teams, you'll say, okay, all right, Brenda, you're going to be the one writing the information. I'll be handling the video camera. You'll be the one writing the information. A good trick would be to have a second person also doing some writing, no? Because what one person might miss, the other person might get, right? So you'll have a short description of the element. Then we move, yes, sir.
Nigel, could you just scroll your screen up a bit?
Yes.
Further up?
I think you showed just.
Or you just want to focus on that first item, 1.1?
1.1. It's stuck. Is it? I'm moving the screen. It's not moving?
No.
No.
Ah, I see. Okay, let me see something here. Sorry. 1 second.
Good job.
Let me just share. I'll just share my whole screen where you can see me in real time sharing. All right. Can you see it
Right.
again? Unit 6?
Yeah, moving now.
Moving now.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, down. Yep.
I take it that you want to take questions at the end because I see Tahira's hand is up.
Right. But I just want you to see this questionnaire, no? This is actually something that you can adapt and use for your own inventorying exercise. No?
Okay.
So we're at 1.5, and you see here being able to write a short description of the element. And so you're now going into the characteristics of the element. Who are the performers, practitioners directly involved in the enactment or practice of the element? And you want to include their name, age, gender, professional category, right? Keeping in mind that you might have multiple practitioners, you might have a single practitioner. Other people in the community who are less directly involved, but who contribute to the practice of the element or facilitate its practice or transmission. Meaning they're prepared, as an example here, if it's Carnival, they prepare stages, costumes, training, supervising, sponsoring. I think one of, was it Eugenia, was sharing that example of Carnival this morning in the chat, right? The homework dealt with this circle of involvement. This is that aspect of it here. What are the languages or language registers involved? In countries that's, if it's storytelling, is it English? Is it Patois? Is it Spanish? Is it some other language, right? What are the tangible elements? Because the two go together, Are there instruments, specific clothing or spaces? Are there ritual objects associated with the enactment or transmission of the element? Are there other intangible elements associated with the enactment of the transmission? Some ICH, and this is important to remember. Sometimes ICH elements are blended into other ICH elements, no? Let me give you an example. So in a Maroon village in Belize, we have a tradition called the Christmas Bram. And the Bram is 2 days of celebration on the 25th and 26th of December. And it involves going house to house in the village, community members going house to house, celebrating, and they're singing and they're drumming and so on. And so that in itself is a event, but the associated elements include the performance of a tradition known as the Sambai. And that involves a nighttime, creating a nighttime circle around a fire where the men, to the rhythm of the drums, will jump over the fire to demonstrate their virility and so on, right? So you have the Christmas Bram as one ICH cultural celebration, but is associated with the performance of the Sambai, which is something that you can document by itself as an ICH. So you want to keep those sorts of dynamics in mind. So carnival in itself, for argument's sake, there might be other ICH elements associated with carnival, right? The making of costumes, perhaps, the skills associated with that. So those are things to consider. You inventory the broader event first and then its components, or do you do them together? No? I guess it might be, but that will require some organization on your part, no? And being able to understand what are the components of the element you're dealing with. 2.6 looks at what are the customary practices governing access to the element, if any, and this is pretty critical. Mr. John shared with me that he does it's a family secret. There's a particular spice that he uses in there that he did not share, but this is how it's made, no? And you make a note of that. What are the modes of transmission to others in the community? Well, in the evening time, you have the mass camps. On weekends, you have the children going down to Mr. Betson's boatyard, where he shows them how to build the boat, right? It starts in school. The family down on Main Road, Mr. Rodriguez, he teaches children how to make the drums. That sort of thing. How is it transmitted? What are the relevant organizations, if any, no, involved with the element? What is the state of the element? So you see how extensive this thing is in terms of the viability. Are there threats to the continued enactment and transmission of the element within the relevant communities? What are the threats? Say what they are, because this will tell you how to help to safeguard it. What are the threats to the sustainability of access to tangible elements and resources, if any? Dario talked about the tree planting and so on this morning. So if the trees that are used to build the boat or build the drums or make the paddles, if those resources are more scarce, that's a threat to the sustainability. Sorry, to the viability. What's the viability of other intangible elements associated with the element? So remember up top, we talked about some elements being associated with another element. Same thing here. What's the viability of those other elements? Are there any safeguarding measures in place to address any of these threats and to encourage future enactment and transmission of the element? Data restrictions and permissions. Did you receive consent from and involvement of the communities concerned in the process of collecting information? And you write that here, yes, Mr. Rodriguez gave his permission. Now, I think about this, and we'll do this in the training. How do you establish free, prior, and informed consent? Sometimes you have people write and sign that they are agreeing. Sometimes you record them saying it. But it's important that that is done in one way or the other, no? Through one means or the other. Are there any restrictions? And you will write that in. What are the restrictions according to Mr. Rodriguez? Who are the resource persons? What is their name and their status or their affiliation? And the date, places of the information generated, no? When was this information? Are there references concerning the ICH element? So now this morning we were talking about the question of duplicity, duplicating stuff. This is where you put that information. You have this book, this video, and so on. That is the literature of it, no? Are there audiovisual materials? What documentary materials and objects are there in the archives, museums, and private? You see how extensive this is, right? Inventorying data. Who compiled the inventory? Proof of consent of the communities. So you will attach a signed document, or you will say that this was recorded in during the interview and the consent is provided at minute 5.5 of the interview. The date of entering the information in the inventory. So it's a system. So this, you go out into the field, you document it for argument's sake, and then when you get back in, you still have to do what you call a data clearing, no? You still have to sit with it and work it through. So let's say you have 10 persons doing this sort of thing to get different eyes on the ground. When you come back, it will be someone's responsibility to look at all 10 and to generate a single inventorying sheet, right? So it's not, you see how it's becoming more and more detailed here. All right, let's open up for questions. I see hands up, Tahira, Gloria, and Adriana. Well, let's start with Adriana because she has had her hand up since yesterday.
Yeah, tired. She's trying to fly.
I will mute, Darren.
Go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everybody. As we move forward and we are receiving this valuable training and knowledge from Nigel, I have a question, Nigel. Has I'm seen or visual? Can you go to the inventory again, please?
Okay, one second.
Form that you have that and the inventory questionnaire that we shared yesterday. By the way, we shared yesterday with the materials. But in case that you haven't, let us know. So, point 3.
Is it moving? Is it moving?
Has you spoken, explain us? I'm trying to understand how will the criteria that we're using. So because there are several factors or elements to put in place. So on one hand, we have to do this by the community or with the community, and the community has to be involved. Or several communities have to be involved. But at the same time, what I'm seeking here is that we might need somebody, several experts in heritage, because then we can lose that valuable information, or maybe we cannot put it in proper words. Whatever is filling this ICH questionnaire, because then again it's a matter of putting my subjective part of it, as I'm not, for example, I might not be expert in heritage in Grenada's heritage, but then that means that I have to be a researcher, as somebody, an expert in heritage, included in this process in order. So how do you make that balance? How we can make that balance between what the community has to say, what has, let's say that I will be the ICH coordinator with the technicians going on the ground, and they will be writing, but then an expert has to be involved. So if you can ask me, what is your experience based on different projects in the Caribbean? What do you have seen? Thank you.
Well, the when you say experts, let's look at.
Yep. Oh, sorry.
No, 1 second.
That's up. Go ahead.
Yes.
When you say experts, there are various. Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right. So when you say experts, you will need to survey. This is why the more persons involved, the better, no? You will need to survey the pool of persons involved in the process overall, right? First, you'll have to know what it is you want to inventory, right? And then you look at the landscape of who the persons are that can participate in that process, including communities. Because there's a role, it's simply about finding a role. No, I'll give you an example, a personal one. So I was the director of this institution and a focal point for implementing the convention. But while I understand culture to some degree, and I wanted to be the one writing, sitting there writing and interviewing, a lot of times I had to just find another role for myself, no? As the cameraman, or as the person doing the summaries and so on. But so it's just a matter of putting people in roles that they can perform, right? Some persons might like using the camera. Some persons might like or have a skill in dialogue and exchange. So it's finding those persons. But what we used to do as a practical matter, before we embarked on any inventorying exercise, we would have a workshop to precede the inventorying exercise. And the purpose of that workshop was to brief the persons going out into the field about the element that we wanted to. So we provided them with the background information. So we're going to go speak with Mrs. Ernestina Moore in Caledonia. Ms. Ernestina is the eldest practitioner of the comparsas of Carnaval in that village in northern Belize. And the Carnaval, as we know it, is this, and this, based on the information that we have available. All right. And so you do a sort of briefing, no? Before you actually go into, and what we do, we utilize persons who have knowledge of the element to come do that, no? Right? To come do that and say, this is what we'll be going here, this is who we'll be speaking with, and this sort of thing. So you do a briefing first, and then you go knowing who will be doing what, no? Be playing what particular role. It's always good if you have familiar faces on the ground, community liaison. So if I know Newton is from a particular community and we're going to go inventory that, Newton, would you be able to act as a sort of go-between for us in this element? Or if you have the time, because it's a passion really. Go down to the communities first, speak with them, develop the relationship, and then go do the inventorying, documentation and inventorying, no? So you want to have contact with them first, and then, so you will have to understand your own landscape, Adriana, as to who can do what, no?
One more question that related to that, please. Sorry. Based on your comments, I have another one that's, I know that other people are waiting, but what about the scope? The dimension of the ICH elements, because this is the first time that we are doing it officially, but then what about those communities who are forest inside of the bushes? So I will put an example. In Venezuela, we have these communities in Bolivar state, which are in the Amazon. And if I want to document an ICH element of the Yanomami is indigenous people. So here we might have that, because based off of the human resources that we have right now, And this is our first attempt to do it, and I hope that we will succeed for sure. So what about that
scenario?
that possibility that we don't want to make that mistake of leaving somebody or any ICH element behind or a part of this? So how we will put that in place?
Well, a good rule to apply is to do what's doable at first, especially if you're just starting out. Do what's doable, because while it is your intention to be inclusive, inventories are always in progress. So if something is not doable immediately, you plan for it, no? You get Daryl to go ahead into the community, into the Venezuelan forest, and have Daryl go meet with some community liaison person there, a village leader, community leader, speak with them, develop a relationship, tell them what it is you're trying to do. And if they agree, if they give you the consent, then you proceed. Because you might want to do something, but they might not want you to do it. So that's another part of what you have to face, no? Right? And that's fine. That's completely fine. So it's a process of negotiation and doing what's doable, right? Doing what's doable.
But Nigel, what I think is coming out here is that you cannot be in a hurry, and you have to allocate a lot of time and patience, because to get 5 minutes worth of information, you might have to spend 2 hours with a person.
That's it.
Coming with a completely informal approach, because if you come with formality, they may reject you. But if it's like a social call, then it's more relaxed, and you have to allocate the time, and that's going to be a challenge too. Huh?
Very good. That's it. I'll tell you what. Talk about allocating time. I've been in communities like 10, 11 at night, right? And I am like 5 hours away from home, right? That sort of thing. And you have, if that's, and you have to face the reality, right? You'll have those sorts of experiences, but the more persons involved, the better, because it makes the load easier for everyone to carry, no? Right? So that's it. And for example, maybe Miss Jane, she won't talk to you until tea time. Come to my house for tea, Daryl, right? And then she'll sit and tell you about how they used to make the teas and so on. No, you can't tell Miss Jane. Miss Jane, they come 10 o'clock because I want to teach you. No, you can't do that, right? It will happen when it's supposed to happen, when the communities tell you, no? Come. Because Miss Jane has things to do at 10 o'clock, right? But at 7 p.m., that's when she's making her tea, so you can come see. You can come sit with her, right? All right, Gloria.
All right, I'll be brief. I appreciate the use of the questionnaire. It's an in-depth way of capturing a lot of information. I appreciate the fact that you need to have a team approach to collect the data. There must be multiple visits. There may be a need to have multiple visits to that one location. And then there's a cost for traveling multiple times to that place. And what my concern now is, what about if a particular community has more than one element? It means that you have to capture 2 different sets of information from that same community. Therefore, you have to use the questionnaire at least twice, and it means going back and forth and getting all of the information. And also, what do we do when there are elements that are no longer in use in that particular community? You would have heard it happen there before, but currently it doesn't happen anymore. How do we address those situations? The 2, meaning that they no longer do that particular ICH there in their community, and there are communities with more than one. So how do we use the questionnaire to collect data in that regard?
Okay. So let's deal with the last question first. If you come across elements that are no longer practiced, you could still make it a good practice among yourselves. So document whatever knowledge is shared to you, right? So that you have it in your records, no? Right? Whatever knowledge you can get your hands on, you can have it for your records. The second part, the first question requires, the best answer is patience, no? Don't go, it's a, you know, there's a little bit of a anticipation, anxiety when you're going to, you want to get it done, you know, let's do it, and so on and so forth, right? But I would advise, as much as possible, you let things happen in their own context, in their own natural spaces. Some practitioners might just allocate the time for you to go to do something. For example, if you're going to do carnival, you'll have to, this is a process that will take you the whole season to do, no? It will take you the whole carnival season if you want to capture all the aspects of it, right? So it's, let the situation dictate to you what to do, right? Don't be so anxious. Know what your process is. And as the information comes to you, you follow your process, but you do it as the situation allows, right? So for example, from experience, I can tell you that in our first 2 years of inventorying, we only inventoried like completely in terms of producing all the outputs and so on. We only inventoried like 7 elements over 2 years. That's just one example, no? Because we had to, but it doesn't mean that you can't move fast. I don't know. But we had a system that we put in place and we preferred to do those 7 well. And because we wanted to produce educational outputs and all that sort of thing for each element, and we followed that process, no? And based on the resources that were available, right? But in certainly your own situation will take, but that requires you knowing your situation, no? And what resources are available, right? Tahira?
Sorry, my hand went up by mistake. I was typing something in the chat. So I just put my comment in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Margaret, I saw your hand up.
Yes, it's just a very quick suggestion, maybe to help other people too. But to your point about, I guess, presenting yourself to the community, what worked for me, and I'm in the, I guess, fortunate and unfortunate position of being married to someone that people know. It doesn't mean they know me. So what I did was I staged a get together. There was no agenda. There was nothing. I just talked about ICH and tangible cultural heritage, and that they might see me coming and going, but this was really a time for them to ask me questions. Ask me who my parents are. Ask me where I've been. I'm not even a JCB, I'm an NBH. I'm not born here. So they have to, you have to.
MBH? What's MBH? What's MBH?
Not born here. I love
That's
it.
me saying it was just a little joke, not born
Sound
here.
like you were knighted by the queen or something.
Yeah, it feels sometimes. But you know, you have to know that you are delving into people's personal affairs and they don't know you from Adam. So for me, it was money well spent just to give them a chance to stare at me, ask me a question, and then when they see me again, now we can have a conversation about the real stuff. You
That's
know,
right.
and it started out with me introducing myself to opinion leaders. That's something I haven't heard thrown around in this conversation, but every community has one. Doesn't have to be the minister. It's just an old person that people respect. So I connected with people, key people in the community, explained at length what I'm doing so that when we got together, they trusted me and the community could give me a chance. So when I went back, it was much easier.
Excellent.
But no agenda to start is the agenda.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good suggestion. I wanted to address a question here. We're coming to you right now, Ezra. Kelvin is saying, can the questionnaire be adapted to suit the community? Yes, for sure. Right, depending on what you're doing, you can amend the guide. No, Ezra.
Yeah,
And then sorry, before Ezra, I just want, when Ezra, we'll do a couple more slides and we'll take a break because this morning has been unusual in our discussions. Ezra?
Yes, Darryl, even though we're going over time, I think we should stay with it because it's riveting. There's something I noticed in Grenada, well, it's still going on. You see individuals, especially males, walking around with a cutlass. I mean, a cutlass is a machete. You know, if a Cuban is in Grenada, he may think we're going to have a revolution because there was a machete brigade that brought down the Spanish. So there may be some cultural elements in that, because I went to visit a community, Indo-Grenadian community. You know, I went there about 3 times, and all the males I met there, in a little snacket kind of a beer shop, they all had on a water boots with a machete in the hand, with a cutlass in the hand. So I assume they are farmers. But I think the element of, you know, young guys, old guys walking around with a machete, and also sometimes you see older guys on a Sunday, if they're going to visit a buddy, they will go with a machete or their cutlass.
Yeah.
There's some significance about it, whether or not it's about maybe they're going to bring home a few potato slips or maybe a banana tree or whatever. But it's a practice, and it's a practice, and it also has a symbol that goes with a physical thing that goes with it. So it's something I think that I'm not sure how we're going to, you know, document that, but it might be on an individual basis or like in more known community basis. But there is some significance there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'd have to observe it some more. But what you're looking for is the ICH, no? What the ICH in it all? I have a picture of it, but I would have to actually see the interactions and so on. But you could do the same, no? Look for the intangible cultural heritage in all of it, you know? Right? Maybe it's the farming, it's the life of a farmer, no? The daily routines of a person involved in farming, right? In Grenada. So it'll take you observing it for a while to determine the ICA. You might have to put on the boots and take your cutlass up yourself in order to understand what it's about, no? Right? Right. Okay, so let's proceed to the end of this PowerPoint.
Yes.
So look at some examples here. Sorry, can you see the PowerPoint there?
Yeah.
All right. So on the UNESCO website, and I'll be sharing this with Darryl and the team. I'll be showing where to go, but there are some resources available on UNESCO's website which looks at ethical principles. There are 12 of them are adapted. The same questionnaire, there's a kit for the convention and descriptions of inventory exercises. But let's look at some examples here. In Uganda, how did they organize their inventory? It's community-based inventory in Uganda. The ministry asked a local NGO to undertake the inventory exercise. It sounds similar to me here, no? In Grenada. So you had the 12 Busaga community members. They were trained to identify and inventory ICH elements in their own community. So Margaret talked about what term did you use, Margaret, about community leaders?
Opinion leaders and gatekeepers.
Right, right. So in this case, they have a system where there were 12 community members who were appointed. So probably, I know in some communities, you'd have to approach a village council chairman or a village leader or elder or so on. But you can find that out, no? They developed the questionnaires to suit their situation. They consulted the community and they gathered the information, which was then included in the ICH inventory for Uganda. Right? You don't have to make it an unwieldy process either, no? So long as communities are involved. Here in Brazil, much bigger scenario. They have an institutional and legal infrastructure for ICH and inventorying since the 1950s. So they have a thing of inventories at the province level and then at the federal level. And you have different institutions that keep inventories, right? And so they have a national register inventory and a registry, and there's strong emphasis on community participation and consent. This work, again, just so that you don't, so you take your time and hurry, but at the same time, take your time and do it well. This is supposed to outlive all of us. It's a process of keeps on going, no? Keeps on going so that we can secure for the 7th generation. I think some is an old proverb, you know. In Estonia, community members with specialist skills manage the inventory project after initial consultations with national working groups. So the national working group would be the Grenada National Trust and the foundation, but community members with particular skills like in wood carving or weaving or whatever, they consult with the national working group, and the community organizations and schools get involved, and they inventory and they include it in ICH database, which is managed by a central state agency. So one of the questions, again, you'll have to answer, is this issue of a database? Who manages it, right? A key thing to always remember about this, we'll be looking at this in more detail, is to always have backups of the backups, no? Mm-hmm. Right? So if, God forbid, if a fire were to happen, which we saw in Brazil, I think in the last 2 years, where their National Archives was destroyed, no? And many of their records disappeared with it. You want to have these things, you might even want to have a digitized system for digitization where it's stored in a cloud. So all of these things, you can get an intern, a kid to come in and just scan all of these things and get and store them virtually, you know, or in this cloud, so that's accessible when you need it. So I will provide tonight, we will be providing you with some examples of how inventorying is done in these places, so you can read up on it and determine what works best for the Grenada situation. So let's take it's now 8:55. Is 10 minutes good? Can we come back 10:55? Is it 10:55?
10 minutes.
Yeah.
10 minutes. Can we reconvene at, what time would that be? 11:05?
11:05, yeah.
All right, guys, let's take a break and we'll be back. That was a long first session, but a good one, I think. All right, see you shortly.
Right. Thank you, Nigel.
Yes, sir.
Belize. 2 hours.